want you to think back to your morning routine and answer the following questions. Do you brush your teeth? Do you put makeup on? Do you shave? If you answer yes to any of these questions, you can thank the ancient Egyptians. At this point, you might be wondering why this relates to the ancient Egyptians and why this relates to you. Well, the ancient Egyptians were the first to develop toothpaste, eye makeup, and shaving. Without them, these normal day activities that you do in the morning wouldn't be a thought in your mind. The ancient Egyptians shaped the world as we know it by their government, technology, and culture. I personally relate to this topic because I enjoy learning about complex topics and playing sports. I've done a lot of research on this topic and did a research project in high school, so I know a lot about this topic. First, I will describe the effect of the ancient Egyptian government on the government we see today. Second, I will explain how the ancient Egyptian technology influenced technology we see today. And finally, I will discuss how the ancient Egyptians' culture and language molded the language and culture we see today. And again, the ancient Egyptians shaped the world as we know today by their government, technology, and culture. With any great civilization, a great government needs to be present. According to Mark's 2016 article titled Ancient Egyptian Government, pharaohs and kings offered themselves to the service of the goddess of truth. The reason for this is unknown, but it's thought to be for knowledge and for good harvest and good wisdom. Like any civilization, a social status is implied. At the bottom were the slaves, in the middle were the merchants, and the highest was the pharaoh. Much of this is seen in England, where the queen is the highest ruler. Also, there's a legal system. The legal system is a little different than it is today because there was more harsh crimes for minor punishments. Fines, beatings, and facial mutilations were all the punishment for minor crimes. Today, we don't see that, where it could be just a couple days in jail. Agriculture and animals were also a very important part of their government, as these animals could be used for trade with other stopping at different civilizations around them. Now, government is very important to any civilization, but also great technology is needed for culture to grow. When I say technology, I don't just mean smartphones and flat screen TVs. I mean simply anything that helps a job become easier. As stated by Lawkins in the 2015 article titled Ancient Egyptian Technology, the ancient Egyptians were among the first to write and keep records of their lives. These records were often written in picture form called hieroglyphs, and these could be the result of the first alphabet that we see today. Pyramids and the temples of Giza were also very world-renowned still today. Temples and structures that we see. These temples were very aesthetic, but required a lot of work. The ancient Egyptians knew that they couldn't haul large blocks up to the top of the mountain without a pulley system, so they developed a pulley system to help them lift it all up. Also, medicine was a huge part of the ancient Egyptian culture, much like it is today. The medical professionals back then were very smart, and they knew that infection could occur without proper care. They used raw meat, linen, and stuff like that to cover up wounds, and they fixed bones, basically like we see today with any other doctor. However, again, they were very smart, so they knew that some patients would obviously die, so they just kept them company before death occurred for them. Also, the ancient Egyptians were the first to develop a glass. This glass was called faience, and it was often made from a semi-stone, much different than what we see today. Finally, it is a little known fact that the ancient Egyptians were great mathematicians. They already knew the hypotenuse formula, and they knew that on the opposite side of a right-hand triangle, there's a hypotenuse. They also figured out the different formulas to make the pulley system, like I mentioned before, to pull all the stones up to the top of the mountain. Now, technology is something that is constantly changing, but one thing that should not change is the culture in any civilization. Like I stated before, culture is one part of a civilization that should never change. Just like today, we have our own beliefs and customs that were passed down from generation to generation. In the 2016 article titled Ancient Egyptian Culture by Eric Reimer, It states that necklaces were commonly worn in ancient Egypt, as were bracelets and earrings. These were also commonly worn by men, as were wigs. The ancient Egyptians put a high value on their appearance, and wigs were a necessity for anyone. Lice was also a big problem in ancient Egypt, so many of them wore wigs to combat that. They would often shave their heads so they wouldn't get lice, or they would often wash themselves in the nearby river. Board games and sports were also a great part, much like today in our civilization. Today, board games are not as common, but sports are a big necessity in our civilization. Cuisine is also a big important in their civilization as well. In their civilization, they would often eat bread and beer as were given during special occasions. In addition to special occasion, the dead were also buried in ceremonial ceremonies. So, in conclusion, first I described the effect of ancient Egyptian government on the world today. Next, I explained how the ancient Egyptian technology influenced the technology we see today. And finally, I discussed how the ancient Egyptian culture and language molded the culture we see today. So, in conclusion, I want you to think back to about that the ancient Egyptians were geniuses that shaped the world today by their government, technology, and culture. Finally, I want you to think back to your morning routine and think about all the different objects you use that could have been the result of ancient Egypt. Don't you wish you could thank them?